The sound of rain had always comforted Emily Parker. It reminded her that the world could still be gentle, even when it felt cold and distant. On most mornings, she walked to work beneath a gray Seattle sky, coffee in one hand, her mind full of thoughts she never said aloud. To others, Emily's life looked steady: a small apartment, a good job as a graphic designer, and a few close friends who checked in occasionally. But beneath that calm surface lived a quiet ache she didn't fully understand. She wasn't unhappy. She simply felt incomplete. At 32, Emily had built a life she could be proud of. But it often felt like watching a movie without sound. Everything looked right, yet something essential was missing. Her days were predictable: wake up, commute, work on designs that rarely inspired her, and return home to a silent apartment that still smelled faintly of paint from when she'd redecorated months ago. Sometimes she caught herself staring at the city lights through her window, wondering if anyone else out there felt the same: a quiet longing for connection, for understanding, for something that made life feel less ordinary. That morning began like any other, except for one small thing: the weather had turned suddenly wild. The wind pushed against her umbrella until it snapped inside out, nearly pulling it from her hands. She laughed softly, partly out of disbelief, partly because she didn't know what else to do. Her hair clung to her face. Raindrops traced little rivers down her coat. She ducked into the first Café Chassa, small corner shop with warm lights and the smell of cinnamon in the air. The bell over the door chimed gently as she entered, shaking off the cold. The sound of soft jazz filled the space, and for a brief moment it felt like stepping into another world. "Rough morning?" the barista asked, smiling kindly. "You could say that," Emily replied, brushing water from her sleeves. She ordered a latte and found a spot near the window, watching people hurry by on the wet streets. They all looked like tiny stories passing through her view, each one heading somewhere important, each one unknown to her. And that's when she saw him. A man sat 2 tables away, reading a book that looked old and worn, its pages soft from use. He had dark hair, a neatly kept beard, and a calm expression that seemed completely untouched by the chaos outside. There was something about his stillness that drew her attention. He looked comfortable in his own company, like someone who didn't need to rush to prove anything to the world. Emily looked away quickly, embarrassed by her own curiosity. She wasn't the type to notice strangers, let alone feel intrigued by one. But somehow she kept glancing back once, and twice, and then it happened. He looked up and caught her gaze. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It was just a moment: simple, quiet, real. He smiled, the kind of small smile that said, "I see you." Emily felt her heartbeat quicken, and she returned the smile before looking down at her cup, pretending to stir her coffee. She could feel warmth rising in her cheeks, but she wasn't sure why. Maybe it wasn't even about him. Maybe it was the reminder that she could still feel something genuine, unexpected, and alive. After a few minutes, he stood up to leave. As he walked past, he paused for a second. "You might want to try the caramel blend next time," he said softly. "It's better on rainy days." Before she could reply, he was gone out into the drizzle, disappearing into the blur of umbrellas and passing cars. Emily sat frozen for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. That tiny exchange felt like nothing and everything all at once. She didn't even know his name, but the way he spoke, gentle, unhurried, stayed with her long after he left. The rest of the day passed in a haze. At work, she found herself thinking about that moment again and again. It wasn't about attraction or romance, not yet. It was about connection, a reminder that her story wasn't finished, that maybe there were still chapters waiting to be written. That night, as she sat by her window watching the rain return, Emily thought about how strange life could be. One small encounter, one smile, one kind voice, and suddenly the world didn't feel quite so lonely. She wondered who he was. Maybe he was just another busy stranger who had already forgotten her by now. Or maybe, somewhere out there, he was thinking about the girl with the broken umbrella who smiled back. The thought made her heart flutter. It's just a little." She laughed at herself softly. "Don't be ridiculous," she whispered, wrapping her hands around a warm mug of tea. But deep down, something inside her had shifted. It wasn't hope exactly, it was something gentler, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The rain continued, tapping against the glass, steady and soft, almost like a rhythm syncing with her heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months, she felt curious about it. Emily leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the sound of the storm carry her into a quiet calm. Somewhere in that peaceful moment, she realized how much she still wanted to believe in kindness, in connection. In love, she didn't know that the stranger with the book would soon return to her story, or that their paths would cross again in the most unexpected way. But destiny, as always, works quietly just like the rain. The following week, Emily found herself back at the same cafe, partly by coincidence, partly by something she didn't want to name. She told herself she just liked the atmosphere, the music, the warmth. But when she stepped inside and saw him again, sitting by the window with that same old book, she realized it wasn't just the coffee that had brought her there. He noticed her almost immediately. His eyes brightened with recognition. "You again," he said with a soft chuckle. "Still fighting umbrellas, I hope?" Emily laughed, shaking her head. "No umbrella disasters today. I've learned to walk with the rain instead." There was something easy about the way they talked, as if they had met before in another life and were simply picking up where they left off. He told her his name was Daniel Reed and that he taught English literature at a nearby community college. He spoke about books like they were living things full of emotions, waiting to be understood. Emily listened, fascinated not just by his words, but by how genuinely he cared about them. She told him about her work as a graphic designer, how she spent hours creating visuals that helped other people tell their stories. Daniel smiled thoughtfully. "So you turn feelings into pictures," he said. "I try to do the same with words." That afternoon stretched longer than either of them had planned. Rain turned into sunlight, and the cafe slowly emptied around them. Before leaving, Daniel said quietly, "I usually come here on Fridays. Same time, same seat." He didn't ask her to join him, but he didn't need to. The following Friday, she came. Their connection grew slowly, wrapped in the rhythm of ordinary days. Every week, they'd meet at that little cafe, sharing thoughts about art, music, and life. Emily started to notice things about him, the way he ran his fingers along the edge of his cup when thinking, how he paused before answering deep questions, or how his eyes softened when he talked about his students. And Daniel noticed her, too. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about design, the calm in her voice when she described the colors she used to express emotion, and the gentle sadness that sometimes appeared when she thought no one was looking. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the clouds, Daniel asked, "Have you ever felt like you were waiting for something but didn't know what?" Emily hesitated before answering. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I've been waiting for a long time for a feeling that makes everything make sense." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that feeling doesn't come all at once. Maybe it arrives in small pieces." There was silence between them, not uncomfortable, just full of meaning. The kind of silence that only happens between people who understand each other without needing to fill every space with words. A few days later, Emily found herself thinking about her past, about the people she'd let go of, the friendships that had faded, the moments when she had chosen safety over possibility. She remembered one particular memory, her college years, when she had fallen deeply for someone who never truly saw her. It wasn't heartbreak that had left a scar. It was the feeling of being invisible. Maybe that was why Daniel's presence felt so different. He didn't try to impress her or fix her. He simply noticed her, as if she existed fully in his world. But as their connection deepened, Emily sensed something unspoken in Daniel's eyes. Too, something distant, almost hidden. He often spoke fondly about his students and his work, but never about his family or his personal life. One afternoon, when she gently asked if he had ever been married, he paused before replying. "I was engaged once," he said quietly, "a long time ago. We wanted different things, I guess." She moved away and life moved on. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a trace of quiet acceptance. But Emily could tell that some part of him still carried the shadow of that story. She didn't press further. Instead, she smiled and said softly, "Sometimes the past doesn't let go until we understand it." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "And sometimes," he said, "it lets go the moment we meet someone who makes it feel distant." Those words lingered with her long after they parted that evening. Weeks passed, and the two of them became part of each other's routine without even realizing it. Emily began sketching at the cafe, often while Daniel read nearby. He'd occasionally glance over her shoulder, admiring her work, and she'd blush when he complimented her use of color. It had been several months since Emily last saw Daniel. Life, in its usual rhythm, had quietly taken over. Work deadlines had piled up, her apartment felt emptier than usual, and the little cafe where they had met had changed its menu, though the same soft jazz still played in the background. Emily thought she had moved on, but a small ache in her chest whispered that some part of her hadn't. She was walking home from work one late afternoon, the sky painted in dusky shades of orange and gray, when fate decided to intervene. The wind carried the scent of rain, and the first drops began to fall, tapping lightly against her umbrella. Emily frowned and pulled it tighter, wishing for a quicker walk. And then, in a moment she would never forget, she saw him. Daniel was standing across the street, holding a familiar leather-bound book. He was waiting at a crosswalk, glancing at the traffic but unaware of the world around him. Emily froze. Her heart skipped. For a second, the bustling city seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them and a flood of memories that rushed in like a tide she hadn't expected. "Daniel," she whispered, almost to herself. He turned, his eyes widening for just a second before a gentle smile spread across his face. "Recognition, Nan, something more tender sown there." Time had passed, but the bond they had shared felt untouched, as if months hadn't separated them at all. Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to run away, convinced that fate had just been teasing her, but another part propelled her forward. She stepped into the street, letting the rain sprinkle her hair, and waved. Daniel's smile widened. He crossed over quickly, keeping pace with her. "Emily," he said, voice calm yet filled with warmth. "It's been a while." "Has," she replied, her own voice shaking slightly. "Too long, I think." They walked together, letting the city's evening rush flow around them. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar, like the pause between two notes in a melody that both of them knew by heart. Then Daniel spoke again, softer this time. "I didn't expect to see you today," he said. "I was actually just thinking about that cafe we used to go to." Emily's chest tightened. "Me too," she admitted. "I've thought about it more than I care to admit." The rain slowed, leaving droplets glistening on the streets, and the city seemed to shrink around them. Everything about this moment, the smell of wet pavement, the muted chatter of passersby, the golden light of the setting sun made Emily feel like she had stepped into a memory. She had almost forgotten. Daniel looked at her with a seriousness that made her pause. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again," he confessed. "I kept thinking, maybe I had lost my chance." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. All the questions she had pushed away, the uncertainty, the longing, the quiet ache for connection rose to the surface. I was scared," she admitted. "Scared that, if I reached out, it might be too late." He smiled gently, the kind of smile that eased the ache in her chest. "Sometimes it's never too late," he said. "Sometimes the timing just needs to catch up with us." They stopped at a small park near the waterfront. The swings creaked in the breeze, and the reflection of city lights shimmered in puddles along the path. For the first time in months, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Daniel's presence wasn't just comforting, it felt like a reminder that the world could still hold surprises worth waiting for. "I've missed this," Daniel said quietly. "Missed talking with you, walking with you, just being around you." Emily hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But she finally let herself speak, the words tumbling out with the honesty she had kept locked inside. I missed it too, more than I realized. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. Daniel's eyes softened, reflecting a mix of relief and something deeper hope. Perhaps, or recognition of the bond they shared. I think, he said after a pause, that some things are meant to find their way back, no matter how long it takes. The sincerity in his voice struck her, making her realize just how strong her feelings had always been. All the small moments they had, shared the quiet conversations, the laughter over coffee, the comfortable silences were no longer just memories. They were the foundation of something real, something she hadn't dared to name but now couldn't ignore. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves around them, and Emily felt as if the city itself was holding its breath. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him the way the light touched his face, the calm certainty in his eyes, the warmth that had drawn her in months ago, and she felt an undeniable shift inside her. This feels like the beginning again, she said softly. Daniel nodded, understanding her completely without needing more words. Yes, he said, and maybe this time we won't let it slip away. They walked in silence for a while, side by side, letting the rhythm of their steps match the quiet beat of their hearts. It was a simple moment, yet it carried the weight of months apart, the longing of unspoken words, and the fragile thrill of realizing that fate had brought them together again as they reached the edge of the park. Emily felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. She didn't know what the next chapter held, but she knew one thing with certainty. The bond they shared, built slowly, carefully, and patiently, was still alive. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. The days after their unexpected reunion were filled with quiet tension and tender glances. Emily and Daniel had fallen back into their old rhythm, walking together, talking about books and life, sharing small smiles that carried a weight neither dared to name. Yet beneath the calm surface, 1,000 words lingered. Unspoken and fragile, Emily noticed it most when they sat across from each other at the cafe. She wanted to tell him how much she had missed him, how the months apart had left a hollow space in her heart. But every time she opened her mouth, the words seemed to vanish, swallowed by fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear that her feelings might not match his. Fear that confessing too much too soon could shatter the fragile balance they had carefully rebuilt. Daniel seemed to carry the same hesitation. He spoke gently, often leaving pauses in their conversations that felt heavy with meaning. Sometimes his hand would brush against hers accidentally, and they would both pull back quickly, smiling awkwardly. Their eyes met often, lingering just a moment longer than polite. But neither dared to speak the truth that hovered like a fragile shadow over them. One rainy evening, they found themselves walking along the waterfront. The city lights reflected in the puddles, stretching like long, golden trails beneath their feet. Emily tightened her scarf against the chill, feeling both comforted and exposed by the intimacy of the moment. "You've been quiet," Daniel said softly, not pressing, just observing. "Is everything okay?" Emily swallowed, wishing she could tell him everything. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "About the past. About everything." He nodded, understanding that she meant more than words could capture. "I think about it too," he said. "A lot. About how things ended, about time lost, and about the things we never said." Her heart fluttered. He was thinking about it. He was thinking about them. She wanted to ask if he had felt the same longing she had, the emptiness in the months apart, the ache that had followed her quietly, like a shadow she couldn't shake. But she didn't. Instead, she let the silence speak, because sometimes silence was more honest than any words could be. The truth was, both of them had carried ghosts from the past, memories of disappointment, moments of lost hope and fears of being hurt again. Emily remembered nights spent alone, staring at the city's skyline, imagining what it would be like if someone truly saw her. She had almost given up on that idea, convinced that deep connections were fleeting. Yet Daniel had returned calm and steady, as if the universe itself had orchestrated a second chance. Daniel, meanwhile, had lived with his own quiet regrets. The engagement he had lost years ago had taught him lessons about timing, patience, and the fragility of relationships. He had promised himself he would never rush love again, never allow himself to cling to someone out of fear. Yet when he saw Emily that rainy afternoon, something in him stirred a deep, undeniable pull that he couldn't ignore. They were both aware of it, though neither admitted it. Their proximity, their shared moments, the stolen smiles, they all spoke louder than any words. And yet the fear of disrupting the delicate balance kept their truths locked inside, unspoken but ever present. One evening, Emily found herself at the park where they had first wandered together. Daniel was there too, reading on a bench beneath the soft glow of a lamp. She approached cautiously, unsure if she could face the weight of all the feelings she hadn't expressed. "Hey," she said softly, as if testing the air between them. He looked up, his eyes brightening. "Hey," he replied, closing his book and setting it beside him. "I was hoping I'd see you tonight." Emily smiled faintly, the corners of her lips trembling. She wanted to tell him that she had been thinking of him constantly, that each day apart had felt incomplete. But she didn't. She only sat beside him, letting the silence carry their emotions for them. Minutes passed. The night air was crisp, filled with the distant hum of the city and the occasional rustle of leaves. Emily stole glances at Daniel, watching the subtle expressions on his face, the gentle furrow of his brow, the quiet intensity in his eyes. And she realized that he was holding back too, that he was feeling the same longing, the same hesitation, the same quiet struggle between fear and desire. I'm glad we're here," she said finally, keeping her voice neutral yet warm. "It feels right?" Daniel nodded slowly. "It does," he admitted. "Even if we don't say everything. Sometimes just being near you is enough." Her heart ached and swelled at the same time. Enough. Just enough. Those words were honest and beautiful. They were the unspoken truth that had been hovering between them for months. The truth, that connection, when real, didn't always need to be named immediately. They sat together, side by side, letting the quiet night speak for them. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just to people, acknowledging the bond they had built and the feelings they had carefully hidden. It was fragile, and it was powerful as Emily walked home later that night. She felt a bittersweet mix of hope and uncertainty. The unspoken truth between them was like a seed planted in fertile soil, had taken months to root. But now it was alive, ready to grow, and she knew, deep down, that when the time was right, both she and Daniel would find the courage to voice what they had held back for so long. Until then, the quiet moments, the stolen glances, and the shared silences would carry the weight of their hearts. Hook for part 5. The days after the quiet night in the park seemed heavier to Emily. She carried the unspoken truth in her chest like a secret melody, each beat reminding her of what she longed to say but could not. Daniel had been present, as steady as ever, yet the distance between what was felt and what was expressed had grown, lingering like a cloud over their moments together. Emily tried to tell herself she was being cautious, that patience was a virtue. But patience, she realized, could also be a cage. Every glance Daniel gave her, every soft laugh, every subtle gesture reminded her of the bond they shared, one that neither of them had fully named, yet both could feel. Then, one Thursday evening, fate nudged them forward. Emily was at the cafe they often frequented, sketchbook open, trying to distract herself with a freelance project. The city lights reflected off the rain-specked windows, and the soft hum of conversation created a calm cocoon. She wasn't expecting him yet there. He was, standing at the doorway, shaking off his umbrella. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, the air seemed to change. "Emily," he said softly, as if speaking her name aloud could bridge the months of silence. She looked up, startled by the intensity of the moment. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. He approached slowly, taking the seat across from her without asking, as if claiming the space had been his all along. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, letting the weight of time and emotion settle between them. Finally, Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice was low but steady. "I can't keep pretending anymore, Emily. There's something I need to tell you." Her heart thudded in her chest, a mix of anticipation and fear. "What is it?" she asked softly. He took a deep breath, gathering courage in the way he had seen her do countless times before when facing her own fears. "I've been holding back because I was afraid. Afraid of rushing, afraid of making a mistake. But the truth is, I've never stopped thinking about you, about us, about every moment we shared, and about what it could mean if we were honest with ourselves." Emily felt a rush of warmth and relief. Her chest tightened and tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them away, wanting to remain composed. "I've felt the same," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "All those months. I thought I was over it, but I wasn't. I've been holding back because I didn't want to ruin what we already had." Daniel's lips curved into a small, tender smile, the kind that made Emily's heart ache in the best possible way. "Then maybe it's time we stop holding back," he said. "Time we stop letting fear decide for us." The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity and promise. For Emily, it was like stepping into sunlight after years of shadows. She reached across the table instinctively, her hand brushing his. He didn't flinch. Instead, he held her gaze, letting the simple touch convey what words could not. They talked for hours that evening. Not about grand declarations or endless promises, but about feelings they had buried, hopes they had kept secret, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them over months of shared moments. Every confession, every gentle laugh, every pause filled the gaps that had existed between them for so long. Emily realized that love wasn't about dramatic gestures or sudden transformations. It wasn't about perfect timing or flawless moments. It was about honesty. It was about being brave enough to reveal what was already there, hidden but alive in the quiet spaces of their hearts. Daniel's honesty unlocked something inside her. She spoke about the months she had spent thinking of him, the sketches she had drawn inspired by moments they shared, the way her life had felt incomplete until he returned. Each word strengthened the invisible thread that had always connected them, and the fear that had held them back dissolved, replaced by a calm certainty she hadn't expected to feel so quickly. By the time they left the cafe, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the soft city lights, and the air was filled with the scent of wet pavement and possibility. They walked side by side, closer than ever, yet not in a rout. The city had settled into its gentle rhythm when Emily and Daniel returned to the familiar streets that had witnessed the quiet beginnings of their story. Autumn had arrived fully, painting the sidewalks in shades of gold and amber, the crisp air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. Everything around them felt ordinary, yet extraordinary at the same time, as if the world had conspired to create a perfect backdrop for their newfound honesty. After months of hesitation, longing, and quiet struggle, the distance that had once kept them apart had finally dissolved. The unspoken truths had been spoken. The fragile bond had been nurtured into something real. And now there was no need for fear to shadow their hearts. They walked together without rushing, savoring the moments that had once seemed so fleeting. As they passed the little cafe where it all began, Emily smiled softly. "Remember the first day we met here?" she asked, her voice filled with nostalgia. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "How could I forget? The upside-down umbrella, the storm, and your scowl at the rain. I remember thinking that someone like you shouldn't be battling the weather alone." Emily laughed, the sound light and warm, carrying with it a sense of relief and joy. "And yet I somehow survived it," she said, her eyes meeting his. "And here you are showing up again like nothing has changed." "Something has changed," Daniel said gently. "I've changed. I've realized that some moments are worth taking a risk for. And some people, they're worth the patience and courage it takes to stay." The truth in his words made Emily's chest ache in the most tender way. She had felt the same for months, carrying a quiet hope that had grown steadily beneath the surface. Now, hearing him say it aloud, she understood that they had both arrived at the same place, two hearts willing to step forward. Together, they continued to walk along the waterfront, the sun dipping low and casting golden pink across the rippling water. The air was filled with the soft hum of the city, distant chatter, and the gentle rustle of leaves. In that moment, nothing else existed except the quiet certainty between them. "I've been thinking," Emily said, pausing to pick up a fallen leaf and turning it over in her hands, "that maybe love isn't just about grand gestures or perfect timing. Maybe it's about showing up every day, even when life is messy or uncertain." Daniel reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably. "I think you're right," he said. "It's about presence, about listening, noticing, and choosing to be there in silence, even in waiting. That's when love feels real." Emily felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a quiet happiness that had nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with peace. She realized that the months of longing, hesitation, and unspoken words had led them here, to a place where love wasn't just a feeling, it was a shared understanding, steady and unwavering. For a long moment, they walked side by side without speaking. Words were no longer necessary. The bond they shared filled the space between them, as powerful and gentle as the tide brushing against the pier. Emily understood that sometimes the most profound connections weren't declared with dramatic gestures, but lived in quiet ways, consistent ways through presence, honesty, and the courage to let someone into the parts of your heart you had guarded for so long. As twilight settled, Daniel stopped and turned to face her. "Emily," he said softly, "I don't know what the future holds. Life isn't predictable, and there will be challenges. But I do know this: whatever comes, I want to face it with you. I want to be present, truly present for everything we can build together." Tears glimmered in Emily's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming clarity of the moment. She reached out, cupping his hand with both of hers. "I want that too, Daniel," she whispered. "I want the patience, the quiet moments, and the courage to love fully. I want us exactly as we are." He smiled, a gentle, heartfelt expression that seemed to carry every unspoken feeling of the past months. "Then let's start," he said, his voice steady and warm. They continued their walk, letting the city lights guide them along familiar paths, each step grounding them in the present while carrying the promise of tomorrow. For Emily, it was a revelation that love was not just about passion or perfection. It was about connection, understanding, and the willingness to embrace another person with honesty and patience. By the time they reached the small park, where they had shared countless quiet moments, the sky had darkened into a deep indigo, and the first stars peeked through. They sat on a bench side by side, hands still intertwined, letting the night envelop them in calm and reflection. In that stillness, Emily realized something profound. Love, when nurtured with patience, courage, and honesty, didn't need dramatic declarations or perfect timing. It simply existed, steady and true, a quiet force that could weather any storm. And now, after months of uncertainty and hesitation, she and Daniel had found it not in grand gestures, but in the small, consistent moments of presence and care that had always been there. Quietly waiting as they watched the stars shimmer above, Emily whispered softly, "I think I finally understand what love really means." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "And I'm glad we found each other so we could understand it together." The night carried on, filled with peace, warmth, and the quiet certainty that this was not just an ending, but a beginning of love grounded in honesty, patience, and the shared understanding that had taken months to arrive at but now, finally, felt timeless. And as they sat together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, Emily knew that whatever life had in store, they would face it side by side together, fully present, and truly home in each other's presence. The end.